Well, welcome everybody to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast. I'm Doug Stevenson, your host, and today I am welcoming my guest and friend, Renee Moorefield. Renee is the CEO of WisdomWorks. WisdomWorks is a woman-owned social impact company with a clear mission to empower leaders to activate and amplify thriving. Now, she works with organizations, she works with individuals, she's got her own, I don't know if you call it an academy or what you call it, but you license people to teach your methodology, your Be Well, Lead Well system. You've got a newsletter, you're all over LinkedIn. I was just reading a post on LinkedIn. And once again, it goes back to thriving. So talk to me a little bit about, just kind of give us an idea of what is this company that you have founded and how did it come to be?
Wow, well, that is a big question. And thanks, first of all, for having me on your podcast, Doug. You and I haven't had a chance to connect in a number of years, and it's always a treat. Every time I see an email from you or a communication from you, I just start smiling because I have such good memories of when you lived near us, and it's now good to connect again.
Yeah, thanks. Colorado Springs is fond in my heart.
Yeah. So I co-founded WisdomWorks with my husband, David, who is still a part of the company somewhat, but mostly retired now. He's thriving as someone who is retired. We founded it 25 years ago, and our early tagline, and still our tagline, our first tagline was healthy leader, healthy business, healthy world. Today it's thriving leader, thriving organization, thriving amplified. So we haven't changed our focus much at all. We've just shifted the language a bit. And I think what we were noticing then, after working in global companies for already many years at that time, is we were seeing that there was so much focus in organizations on efficiencies and driving towards certain results that we were forgetting that how we work together shapes the results we get. So many organizations weren't really including all the people factors, all those psychosocial factors, all those spiritual factors, all those mental emotional factors that really support whole people showing up to do work together, to innovate together, to create something extraordinary together. And we wanted WisdomWorks to be about that, to help leaders examine the extent to which their organizations were truly thriving and the people in them were thriving, and including the leaders themselves. So as far as so that was the focus on thriving. As far as a formal definition of thriving, we do have a formal definition of thriving that we've developed over the years, and that is to be internally well-resourced to handle the complexities and changes and demands in your life and work with a sense of high quality of life, competence, and growth. So you can see in that definition, there's a lot packed in there. It's not just about your mental and emotional well-being and your physical well-being and your physical health. It's also about your relationship to stress, seeing stress as a life-enhancing force and growing through your experience in life and work. So that's a little bit about WisdomWorks and kind of how we define thriving.
Yeah, thriving is an interesting term, and I would assume that over the years, at least when you started out, I assume that trying to speak to organizations about well-being, health and well-being, thriving individuals, thriving leaders, I would assume that it wasn't so well accepted 25 years ago, but it has evolved into being something that organizations are starting to realize we need to focus on the health and well-being mentally, physically, emotionally of our employees, or they're going to leave. They're going to burn out. They're going to leave. They're going to make bad decisions. There's going to be a lot of dysfunction, a lot of infighting. So how has the acceptance of an organization like yours and the concepts that you teach around thriving and well-being, how has that evolved over the years into being more accepted as a mainstream thing?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. So even before WisdomWorks, I had a number of roles in different global companies. I ran a health promotion department. I ran a change management function in a global organization. I ran an organizational effectiveness department in an organization. So there were a number of things that I did that I always just subversively integrated the concepts of well-being and the thriving of people into them. WisdomWorks was for us really a declaration. No, we're going to stand for this. We're going to stand for this language, this consciousness, this way of being, this way of operating in the world. And you're exactly right that when we first started WisdomWorks, people thought we had grown, like that I had grown a second head. Like
What are you talking about, Renee?
what are
What are
you
you
talking
talking
about?
about?
What are you talking about, really? And but it truly has changed. I mean, WisdomWorks is 25 years old now. This year is our 25th anniversary. So it's
Congratulations.
thank you. It's kind of a big year for
It
us.
is. It is.
And I think there is now much more of a recognition that if we don't create environments that people can bring their whole selves to work and really be authentic and have their voice heard and feel like they belong, that we will do all the things that you just said. People will burn out. We won't be able to attract top talent. We won't retain top talent. I actually just posted on LinkedIn today, and you may have seen that post.
I did.
A colleague of mine, Juan of Emmanuel Deneuve, and his team at the Wellbeing Research Center at Oxford University showed from some very robust data looking at stock price and the well-being of organizational employees and seeing a direct relationship between when people feel like you care about their well-being, it shows up not just in your profitability, but also your stock performance. So, and there's a
Wow.
direct connection there. To me, there's no longer a need for making the business case anymore. It's like when I first started WisdomWorks, we had to make a business case constantly. There's so much data now in the research and also from pragmatic data from company examples, that to not go down a path where you're supporting the whole person at work and designing work environments where people can leave work more refreshed, more well, more having grown as human beings, more capable than when they came. To not do that is a real misjudgment when it comes to organizations themselves. So I'm excited. I think right now we're in a time where there is much more of a focus on this. Yeah, so I think we're in a place now where there's no doubt that if you want to create a system that thrives, you also need to focus on people that thrive.
Now, I know that as your business has grown and you've been speaking all over the world, you're on panels, you're doing certification programs, you're doing things like this with multiple groups of people. You also appear on panels. It seems to me that there are more and more and more people sharing their stories of burnout, their stories of dysfunctional workplaces and cultures. And those stories are what you can use to help people to understand the before and the after, the before health and well-being and the after health and well-being, before we had these kind of programs that you're bringing into organizations and this consciousness that you're bringing forward and helping people to realize, and the after, because stories basically to me are always about the before and the after. Before I got healthy, after I got healthy, before I was, telling stories, after I was telling stories. So how do you see in your presentations, in your panel discussions, the stories that people tell, the power that comes from those stories to help people get it, that
Yeah,
this is important. This isn't just theory. This isn't just profitability. This is human beings
right.
that are really having a hard time and they need some help. And this Be Well, Lead Well initiative can help not just individuals, but organizations. You help the individual, you help the team, you help the organization. So where do stories play a role in this?
Stories are huge. And I know you've been focused as a storyteller for pretty much your whole life. I was going to say career, but I bet your whole life, Doug, you were a natural storyteller. And I think storytelling is a powerful tool for learning and a powerful tool for transformation. So when I step back just from our work world and just think of us as human beings, I think we are naturally story making and storytelling creatures. With every moment we're in, we are creating some story about that. Some of those stories help us experience greater wholeness, greater connection, greater balance, greater sense of kind of that internal well-being that we're discussing. Some of those stories disconnect us. They're stories of bias, they're stories of discrimination, they're stories of either or, they're stories of us and them. So some of those stories really disconnect us. So I think stories themselves, when we're working with, let's say, an individual leader or a team through some of the coaching work that we might do or the transformative work that we might do, it's one thing to support that person or that team in identifying action steps and behaviors that they can step into. So that's one thing, and that is actually very useful. But I find what's even more impactful is to help them explore what are the stories driving their behavior in the first place. Because when they start to get to those stories, whatever those stories are, stories of competition, stories of collaborations, whatever those stories are, they can make a decision. Are these stories still serving us? Is this story still serving me in my own life? We can all ask that when we find ourselves in a story. Is this story still serving me in my own life? And is there an opportunity here that it served for one period of time, but now it's time to shift the story and to create stories that allow us to step into becoming, to the process of becoming what we want to express in our life and our leadership and in our work as teams. So I think stories are really powerful and very transformational. I can give you an example,
Sure, that'd be
like
great.
if that's helpful
Yeah.
to you and to the
Tell
listeners.
me a story, Renee.
I was actually thinking about this because I knew he's going to ask me to tell a story, so I better be prepared with one for myself. Um, I was thinking about growing up. My father always told me, um, don't let the bastards get you down. That was sort of a mantra from my father to me. Don't let the bastards get you down. And I just took it at face value and I kind of understood it at a high level. Like he's saying, don't don't let the life grind you. Don't let people wear you down. Don't let the situation, positive mental attitude, positive mental attitude. So it's interesting I didn't realize how core that story was till to my upbringing. And I realized, well, until I was an early adult, and I went through a transformational leadership experience myself as an early adult in a global company. And they were having us identify core stories in our life. And this one came up like, wow, this has really shaped how I see the world. And once I realized that, I realized two things. One, he was doing it to really make me stronger, particularly
Mhm.
as a female
Yes, yes.
in a world that's often not, or it wasn't at the time, things are changing, but wasn't at the time designed for the empowerment of women. So he was doing it as to protect me and to make me strong. So I really got that. And even as I'm saying that to you, I can feel that in my chest. I can feel my heart open up. I can feel
Yeah.
an appreciation for my dad, who by the way, died at the start of COVID. So I feel this deep connection with this story. But I also realized as an adult that it wasn't a story I wanted to live by anymore. Like I kept asking myself, who are the bastards? Don't let the
That's
bastards in. Who are the
yes,
bastards?
yes,
Because
yes.
in that story, it's a story of people are out to get you. There's an evil. There is something in the world that is you must constantly fight. It for me, it was a story of exhaustion, and I could feel exhausted operating from that story, having to constantly be vigilant
Mm-hmm.
in this
Mm-hmm.
unfriendly world. So I chose as a young adult And this was my first leadership job too, my first formal management role where I was stepping into leadership, and I choose to believe the world is a friendly place. I choose to believe the world is a friendly place. And so my strategy will not be not letting the bastards get me down. Yes, I want to be a strong woman and a strong leader, a good leader, but it won't be from the story that there's bastards out to get me. It will be from the story that the world is friendly, that people are generally trying to do the best they can, given what they know, and that we have this innate capacity and potential for well-being that we haven't even truly connected with yet. And that became my new ground as a leader, and it really affected my life. Kind of to add to that, later on, so a number of years later, I was reading some different quotes that I was using in some leadership development work that I was doing. And I learned that Albert Einstein said that the most important question facing humanity is the universe a friendly place? That's one of the most important questions that we're all facing, that we each have to decide what world we're actually living in, and that every person has to answer this for themselves. So that it just really hit me later on. Wow. I came to that question pretty early with the help of my dad, with the help of his "don't let the bastards get you down." And then Albert Einstein continued to say, if we decide the universe is a friendly place, we will use our technologies, our scientific discoveries, our natural resources to create tools and models for understanding that kind of universe, to really evolving that kind of universe. So our very sense of power, our sense of safety, and our well-being can come from this kind of story about the universe. So that's just to share with you how deeply I believe that our stories shape how we see ourselves in the world, and therefore how we show up in the world.
Yeah, it's so embedded in our cultural upbringing, generation to generation to generation, based on our parents' belief systems that they pass on to us through just a phrase like that. Don't let the bastards get you down. But inherent in that is the word bastards. There's bastards out there and they're out to get you. And that creates this dynamic within you. And then you live out, whether you know it or not, the story.
Right.
And I know that it's different for men and for women, and it's different for men and women in different generations. I grew up in the 50s. I mean, that's a long time ago. My parents were World War II and Depression era parents. Well, their belief systems and the things that they passed on to me in the 50s started to get challenged in the 60s by the whole cultural revolution around me. And I know that I have had to investigate my stories over my life, which is, I think what you're getting at here is there was a point when you were in what I call a scene, but you were in an environment, you were in a corporate environment, you were somewhere, when all of a sudden you're looking around and you're seeing someone and you're thinking, is that the bastard my dad was talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what this is? But he's not a bastard. He has good intentions. And that's when we start to have revelations, I think, and allow ourselves to change the story, which is not easy. I don't believe it's easy to change the story because we get attached to it, becomes part of our DNA, our mental, physical, emotional DNA. And it's like, wait a minute, but this has held me together.
Yeah.
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't.
Well, I agree with you that it's often not easy. It's interesting because as I say this, I got two thoughts. One is it's often not easy because I agree with you. It becomes part of our identity. It becomes how we identify ourselves across generation, across genders, across every way that we define ourselves.
Yes,
So
yes.
that the story, we become attached to our stories. So it's often not easy. On the other hand, it can also happen in a moment. So when you said the word revelation, which I hadn't thought about in this context, but there's often a moment where you have an experience, and it's an experience that opens you and you allow to open you, and you see the world, you perceive yourself and people in the world with almost with fresh eyes. And in that moment, you're changed. So your story may need to catch up to that moment, But in that moment, you know, I am different. And I think that's the process of evolving. I mean, I think that's our continual process of evolving over a lifetime, no matter what age. We always have that potential to be to relook at the stories that have shaped who we are, to open ourselves to new possibilities, and because we open ourselves to new possibilities, to move in the world with new ways of relating, new ways of acting, new ways of being. That to me is the fantastic, marvelous part of being human. It really is, that we have this capacity. Now, do we choose to operate from that often? Often not.
It's
Often
hard.
we forget that we have this capacity,
It's hard.
learn and grow.
Well, that's where you come in. That's where storytellers come in. That's where people who create things like Be Well, Lead Well, an initiative, that's where we come in to the world and say, I've had a revelation. Can I tell you the story of my revelation? Can I tell you the story of what I've learned so that you can maybe shift your perspective? Because they can't get it just by you saying, you need to confront yourself on the stories that you tell yourself. That's an intellectual construct. You can say it to somebody, but that doesn't mean they understand the process.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they understand, but I understand intellectually what you're saying, but Renee, how do I identify that in me? Well,
Yeah.
you tell your story about this belief system and how it came up against a new reality at a different time in your life when you were evolving and growing and maturing. And you share that story as you just did with this audience. And perhaps someone listening to this is going to go, what story am I telling myself?
Mm-hmm.
And because you share the story, it invites the listener passively into considering, well, maybe I have a story that I need to confront. Because as a man growing up, you get messages. As a woman growing up, you get messages. And those messages about how to be a man, how to be a woman, and then you go into corporate and like, well, how do you be a woman in corporate? How do you be a man in corporate? How do men lead? How do women lead? It gets so complex. But the way the complexity gets simplified, I believe, is I have a revelation about something that I'm doing that's not working. I sit down and I figure out, well, what is that story and what is the lesson? I share that story and people come up to me after I share a story, and I know you've had this experience. You tell a story and people approach you afterward and they're like, oh my gosh, that was transformative for me, the listener. And it's just such an amazing thing because we can put it on paper. We can say it, but when do people get it? When the story is revealed, I think. But that means I have to investigate my stuff.
Right. Right.
I have to
Right.
look deeply into Douglas and go, what's your stuff, Douglas? What's your stuff? Now, I want to shift a little bit because I know that you talk about all of these things and you do all of this work and you do all of this speaking and engaging and everything, but you have to thrive. You have to find life balance within yourself. You have to figure out a way, well, what can I do that feeds me? And I know that bike riding is a major part of your life. I mean, I see pictures of you with your helmet and with your bike and with your friends out there, and you're doing some amazing bike excursions, not just riding the bike, but I mean, you did this whole thing up the West Coast. Tell us a little bit about that. And what was that all about in terms of your personal ability to thrive?
Yeah.
And what lessons did you learn doing that? Because that was hard.
Yeah. I adore bike riding, and I have actually connected with what is it about bike riding that I love so much. Growing up, I would think I was a more serious and responsible kid, and kind of went through my childhood very more serious and
I can
responsible.
see that in you.
There's something that happens when I get on a bicycle that it just feels like play, like just joy and play. There's something about just even right now thinking about bike riding.
Makes you
I
happy.
feel more energy. Yeah, it makes me happy. So yes, we've done lots of bike tours, some in Europe, which is really set up well for that kind of travel. And we've done some in different states in the US. Our longest one was the one you mentioned where we went from San Francisco to Mexico. It was
Wow.
fantastic, over 12 days. It was really great. Um, Probably some of the best lessons I've learned in life have been on the bike. And yeah, there are a couple of stories of some bike rides. I'm trying to think of one. We were in Utah, and I'm trying to think exactly. It was the Cedar Mountain area of Utah, but it was around, we were riding around Zion and Bryce National Park, and there was one day where we had to go 33 miles up and 33 miles down. So
Mhm.
this was one of those where you're not going to get a lot of rest unless you just get off the bike because you're either going up or you're going down. You know, with that one, for some reason, because I knew what was about to happen the next day, I'd already seen the profile of what the landscape looked like, that, you know, geographical profile of it. So I knew this was going to be one of those, could be a slogging kind of day, just pedal. I just decided to myself, I'm just keep pedal at an even pace, keep breathing, keep pedaling, and notice my surroundings. That was just my goal. Don't worry about the end of the ride. Just do that. And I have to say, Doug, on this ride, I felt bliss is the word that comes to me. Just bliss, sheer oneness with the planet, sheer oneness with the sounds around me, sheer oneness with my muscles working. I really had hours of this experience of complete happiness, just complete happiness. And then I see a sign that says, I think it was Cedar Breaks National Monument parking lot soon, coming up soon, which was our top of our ride. And I knew that. I had lost so track of time. I was so in the flow that I'd lost track of where I was in the ride. I wasn't looking at my mileage. I decided not to look at any of that. And I see this sign, Cedar Breaks National Monument soon. And so all of a sudden I realize, oh, I'm almost at the end of the ride. Oh, I better start paying more attention to, you know, to the mileage and the ride itself. So now I'm really starting to work, trying to get up the hill because I've obviously only got a few hundred yards to go. I turn a corner and I see Cedar Breaks National Monument parking lot soon. And I'm like, I just got that sign. This is ridiculous. So then I'm going farther and farther and farther. I mean, I am hungry. I'm tired. I've been riding for hours. This is really getting to me. And I see another sign, Cedar Breaks National Monument soon. And in my mind, I'm like, this is bull. You know what? And I get to the top and I get off the bike and I feel exhausted. And all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, you were not exhausted 32 miles of that ride or 32 and a half miles of that ride. In fact, you were in bliss. But what shifted was I had seen the end and I had become now fixated on the end, on the goal instead of enjoying the journey. So one of this huge lesson was about really enjoying the journey along the way rather than being fixated on the goal. And that was one of my lessons from a bike ride. I have many, but that's one.
Well, but that's the way that we take an experience and turn it into a story that can help someone else. To me, storytelling is an act of compassion, is an act of service. It isn't a selfish thing. It's like, well, look at me. I had this experience and I'm so smart. It's like, no, I had this experience where I messed up. I screwed up. It's like I was happy and then I was pissed off. Well, what the hell was that all about? And what I always say is if we investigate our process, if we look back on it and say, well, what was that about? Because to me, story is simply, what was that about?
Yeah.
What was I doing there? What was I thinking there? And you go back to this be well, lead well. Well, it has to do with consciousness. It has to do with paying attention to your brain, your belief, your thoughts, your process, paying attention to it, but then doing something with it,
Yeah.
encapsulating it. Because have you shared that story in your keynotes and in your workshops? Have you
I actually
shared
have
that?
shared that story. I shared it on a newsletter once, and I also have shared it on a number of presentations because it's a great example of how in the moment you can be feeling one way, and by shifting your attention, it totally changes your experience. But by shifting your attention again and noticing what you just did, you can again re-experience the situation and say, oh my gosh, actually this was an extraordinary ride with a small part of angst rather than, and that angst was caused by me, you know?
Well, we
So
are our own worst enemy. I mean, we get in our own way.
yeah, for
It's
sure.
it's our it's our belief systems. Our belief systems come in, and that's the story we tell ourselves. As an artist, I mean, I started out to be an actor. Somewhere along the line, Renee, artists buy into this thing of if you're not suffering for your art,
Mm,
you're not a true artist.
that's a story.
That is a destructive, stupid story. That's a dumb story. I bought into it. I didn't question it. I just believed it. And
Mm,
boy, did I suffer. But what was sad is while I was suffering, I was feeling proud.
You live that story well.
I lived that story well. I'm suffering, and aren't I good? And it took me a while after I got out of Hollywood and left acting behind to go, Douglas, what the heck? What the heck was that all about? And so the stories, if we can understand the beauty of I know you're not as old as I am, but the beauty of a little bit of maturity, a little bit of age is you have the perspective to look back and see some of the things that you've done or believed, the mistakes you've made, and said, oh,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I see that pattern. I see how I contributed to that pattern. So, with your initiative, tell me a little bit about your Be Well, Lead Well certificate program. Tell me a little bit about how you decided I'm not just going to teach this one on one, me, Renee. I need to create a movement.
Yeah,
I need to enroll people and teach them this methodology because I know you spent years creating your curriculum.
yes, yeah, you're right. We actually created an assessment system and a number of resources around it, a whole platform around it that helps people look at um, the holistically at their thriving and stress resilience and how that links to how they lead.
Mm,
So we brought together all the science because I think that is important to kind of lean into, well, what do we
I
know from
agree.
science?
I agree.
Knowing that science always changes as well, but what do we know from science? And then also, what do we know from kind of cultural insights about thriving and stress resilience? For example, in Ayurveda, which is the kind of the healing medical model of India, foundational to that model is we have this innate biologically hardwired capacity to thrive. We're not just designed to survive as a species or as human beings. We're biologically hardwired to thrive. That's a powerful story. If you believe you're already innately designed to thrive, now it's not about looking outside yourself to purchase something or to um, get something, to get wealth, to get fame, to get stuff, to fix yourself so that you can be well. It's
Mm,
more about looking at internally, how do I bring forth this innate capacity to thrive? So our assessment system helps people see the paths for doing that and exploring that in their own life. And at some point in my career, I realized when we created Wisdom Works, we never created it as sort of the Renee Moorefield and David Moorefield show. It was never to be that. We wanted it to be um, an entity or I don't know what the right word is, but something that had a life well beyond us. And so when we built the Be Well Lead Well platform and then the Be Well Lead Well Pulse assessment system, we started a certification program that is certifying people around the world to bring this kind of thinking and this assessment into their work. Right now, we have close to 250. We just did our 15th certification program. So we have close to 250
wow.
professionals. They're human development professionals, leadership development, team development, organizational development, executives themselves. About a third of those people come from North America, about a third from Europe, a little bit smaller amount from Asia Pacific. And then we've got a couple of people from different countries in Africa now and Latin America. So that excites me a lot because I think this conversation about thriving as a world it is a global conversation. It's not an American thing, and it's not a French thing, and it's not a Kenyan thing. It is truly a global conversation. And so we've purposely been trying to um, grow a community around the world that feels connected to one another and that feels like they can gain support and lean into each other for bringing this kind of consciousness and science into the work that they're doing in organizations they're working with. So this community is really awesome. They're working in places that I personally have never worked. For instance, the education system. We have a whole group of what we call certified guides in the UK that have brought Be Well, Lead Well Pulse along with some transformational work to principals and teachers in the UK. Well, the education system across the UK, they're working with education
Wow.
principals and teachers, and
Wow.
that's not a group will probably ever work with, but this community can. So it's super exciting to see all the different ways that this group of people that is growing, by the way, we have more certification programs coming up, how they are advancing, thriving through coaching, through team development, through their work with businesses, through their work with brands, helping brands reframe how they activate well-being for consumers. So it's pretty exciting.
250.
Close to. I don't know the exact number. It's close to
Well,
200.
but you know
I don't want
what?
to overstate anything. So
That's
it's
pretty awesome, though, because you started out with a revelation and understanding that something needs to change. I'm going to be a change agent. I'm going to be one who's going to do this. You are smart enough. I mean, one of the things that I love about you is you don't just approach something from one way, you approach it from multiple ways. The science of it, the humanity of it, the heart and soul and spirituality of it. You combine all of that together so seamlessly, so brilliantly together in a way that anybody that has any kind of learning system, the left brainers, the right brainers, the technologists, the teachers, the nurses, the leaders in a corporation, all of them can go, well, there's enough science here for me. Oh, well, there's woo woo. I like some of the woo woo. There's the spirituality, there's the yoga, there's the emotional, there's all of those kinds of things. But what I love about this is people from all walks of life can find this accessible. But I would assume that one of the parts of this is that when people come together for these assessments, in order for them all to bond with each other, there's a lot of storytelling. Can you tell me a
for
little
sure.
bit about that?
Sure. Well, two ways that happens. One is when anyone in this community that I just mentioned to you, that's close to 250, is using the assessment with people that they're serving, groups that they're serving. So they will use the assessment with that group. And one of the best ways to build bonds within a team of people is to have them tell their stories of where they're from, who they believe they are, their stories of thriving, their stories of resilience. Some of the most impactful stories of resilience come not from when things were all going well. Like thriving is not about rainbows and, and lollipops.
Not at all.
Um,
Not at all.
Thriving is about also knowing that all of us go through periods of time where we do suffer. You mentioned, period of time when you felt like you were suffering. That was even a story that you were living by. Where we have crisis, we're thrown into situations that we don't expect. We create crisis on our own, so we sometimes do that as well. And we make it through it. I think human beings are generally innately resilient as well. We have this desire to grow from and to learn from our tragedies and our hardships. So some of those are some really powerful stories as well. And when teams are in a situation where they have an opportunity in a safe space without judgment and with complete compassion for each other, tell stories about who they really are and what it means to them to thrive individually, it really creates a level of connection and bonds and respect for being human that is it's kind of an unbreakable bond. Like these people are people you want to work with
Mhm.
because they
Yes.
really see you. They really see you in a whole different way. So that's one way that storytelling is so important. Another way that storytelling itself can be really important, and I think I've used this so many, many times, this practice. It's a practice I learned a couple of decades ago from, and I cannot remember the tribe that I learned this from, but it was from a Native American tribe. And they called it the rule of seven. So this is a practice any one of your listeners could do right now if they find themselves in a situation of stuckness, like they just feel stuck. There's a problem that's thorny, they can't get through it. There's a difficulty they're dealing with, whatever it is. It could be at
Mhm.
home, at work, with a
Okay.
neighbor, anywhere.
All right.
So they tell a story about that. So notice the story. When you're in that situation, you notice the story that you tell about that because all of us immediately have a story. And normally in that story, we'll be the victim because that's the story that we tell often when we're stuck. So, but just tell that story. Just write that story down or tell that story to someone. Now, tell that story in 7 different ways. So tell it as a comedy, tell it as a tragedy, tell it as a story of being the victor. Tell it as a story of resilience. Tell it as so tell that story
Hmm.
from different lenses.
Wow.
And what's interesting when you do that, first off, it ends up being way more fun than people think because you start to feel your own being become less attached to your original story. You become less stuck emotionally, mentally, physically. When we're stuck, at least when I'm stuck, I find I have tightness in my chest. I find my jaw gets tight. I find my vision narrows. So when I'm stuck, I get super focused. I'm going to figure this out. When you start to tell all these different stories about it, and now you're making them up, but they, you're making up new lenses, it really loosens all that tightness and creates some space for new perspective to come in. And when there's new perspective, there's new possibilities for action and action to support you with that original problem. So this is a great practice for dealing with a problem. It's a great practice for innovating, like when you're wanting to totally innovate within a team. So those you asked me a couple of ways that well-being was, how do you use the stories themselves? How are stories powerful in groups? And those are a couple of ways.
That's fascinating. I love that seven ways concept.
The rule of seven. Yeah.
The rule of seven concept. I love it when we can look at something and then say, let's reduce it down to a rule or a procedure or a process or steps
Or a tip. Yeah.
or a tip, because the world is complex and there's a lot of stuff spinning all of the time. And when we can reduce something down to what I call the phrase that pays, I'm a big guy
Yes.
with the phrase that pays, my look for the limo. I tell a story and then I end with look for the limo or get out of the bus. I find these, and it's always that nugget, like the rule of seven, that somebody can recall from this entire podcast and go, the rule of seven. And it's catchy. And
Mm-hmm.
the brain grabs onto it because they go, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what story does is story allows someone to go from, I can't do that. That's not me. I don't have that problem, to slowly, and I call it passively, but it's not necessarily passively because people actively participate in your stories and my stories. They actually feel like they're inside them. But what it does it leads them from this, well, that's not me out here. I'm over here and you're over there, to, oh, we're the same. And it's what I call that bonding. It closes the gap. I think
Mm-hmm.
what we're talking about here with thriving is there's 2 things. One is me thriving within myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to change my story in order for me to thrive, but also my story about you. Well, no, you're different.
Totally.
You're not the same as, you don't have the same stuff going on as me. There's this polarization. And this process, this storytelling process allows us to come together because story closes the gap. It creates intimacy.
Mhm.
And I know, well, tell me if you've had this experience. You've given a presentation. You've been in front of a room full of people
Mhm.
in person, because I need this to be an in-person thing.
Sure.
And you've given your presentation, you've shared your ideas and your thoughts, and you've told a couple stories. What happens afterwards when people come to talk to you?
Normally, they will say how they see themselves in that story, how they can totally relate to that story. I mean, I totally agree with you, Doug, that stories are ways we connect. They connect us. The best stories, to me, the best stories are forces of connection. And in fact, so after a good story, people might have learned something, or if after I hear a good story, I might have learned something, but I will also often know something more about myself that maybe I
Yes.
hadn't taken a look at
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
And I feel like, oh wow, I'm not the only one. I'm like, there are other people that have had this experience as well. They've got their own story about it, but there's some nugget there that really makes us so similar rather than different. One of the ways that when I think about the power of story, and I think about, okay, are your stories supporting your well-being, or are they eroding it? And it's often not binary like that. It's often more on a continuum. I think the most powerful stories are the ones that when we connect with that story, or when we hear that story, or when we say that story, they are a source of uplift to us. They are a source of connection. We feel more whole, more balanced, more regulated physiologically. I mean, I can say this physiologically. We will be more regulated through that story rather than dysregulated and stressed.
I like that.
Those are the stories that I am more interested in stepping into myself personally, and also helping others. And I know you are as well, helping others step into those stories that are really a source of uplift rather than division. I'm interested in the stories of connection.
I agree. I think that for me, the process of me connecting to my own stories is where I get liberated from my lack of thriving and allow me to thrive. Because every time that I have a revelation about something that I've been doing wrong, that's been dysfunctional or been self-sabotage, every time I come to a realization about that, it liberates me in a way that I say, oh, well, I can change that. I don't have to do that anymore. And when I take that and I share it, it allows someone else to go, oh, okay. And that's all I think I'm looking for when I tell a story, when you tell a story, is for someone to go, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way.
It's freeing.
It's
It's
very freeing,
freeing.
isn't it?
And it frees up, I think it frees up energy within you and between you, even in a relationship. And I can't think of a story right now of David and I, but I know I've had the experience where we've talked through something and each told our own story about it. And then you come to a realization of, oh, I didn't understand it that way. I have a
Right.
new understanding, and that frees up whatever was stuck in, even in a relationship itself. So, yeah. Thank you for asking these questions, by the way. I think the work that you're doing in the world to help people see the stories within them and understand the power of the stories influencing them is really important work. And then you're also helping people in a way that is just so impactful. I've experienced it myself personally when you helped me with a keynote engagement one time. Um, you're helping people also tell the story, to tell the nuggets, get to the essential nuggets so that they can then share it with other people to really kind of advance well-being and thriving and potential in the world.
We do good work, don't we?
It's a joy. It's a joy
It's our gift.
and a privilege. It's really a privilege to be in
Well, it
this
is. It's a
position.
joy and a privilege, but as I said, it's a gift of compassion. It's a way of saying to the world, I've had these things happen to me, but I don't want to just hold on to them and just feel like I'm just going to keep them to myself. No, I need to share this. You need to share Be Well, Lead Well. You need to get it out there. It's bigger than Renee. And my story theater method is bigger than Doug.
Mhm.
And as we take what we have come up with out into the world can be changed. It can be affected. We can create that little, what is that Chinese thing when a butterfly flaps its wings in California? There's a breeze in China or something. I don't know
Yep.
what, do you know what that one is?
Yeah, I do. I do. I
So,
don't remember it exactly, but that's the sentiment. It's
well,
like take an
you're the
action.
butterfly.
You take an action over here and that you never know the ripple effect that's being, our breaths are even connected. The breath you take right now is connected to the breaths taken around the world. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Renee. This has been very heartwarming, very real, very honest, very educational for my listeners. So take a moment to just tell us how they can follow you. Where can they follow you? I know you're on LinkedIn, but where can they follow you? How can they get involved in your Be Well, Lead Well initiative to maybe, check out, do I want to get to be a part of what she's doing here and get licensed, certified, whatever?
Sure.
So how can people find you?
A couple ways, LinkedIn for sure. So it's just LinkedIn and Renee, Renee Moorefield, Moorefield. Our company name is Wisdom Works. So it's wisdom-works.com. And anyone can see, we've got a newsletter, we've got the certification program, we've got Be Well, Lead Well resources. We've got lots out there that people can just access just for the sake of, we do it just for the sake of sharing and supporting people. And that's also a way to get in touch with us as well.
I'm sure a lot of people are going to be very interested in learning more about you because you're fascinating. The work that you do is fascinating. The work that you and David do is fascinating because I know this has been a journey that the two of you have been on together.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure he has influenced the work because your work on Be Well, Lead Well is also the work of your relationship.
Totally. It really is. For me, Wisdom Works has always been an expression of us. And so when he retired, it was a big change. He's still involved, but he really realized I'm ready to make music the centerpiece of my life. So when he retired, that's exactly what he's done. He's, in a band and doing a lot of gigs. I'm going to a gig tonight for him. And yeah, so
He is thriving.
he is thriving. He really
He's
is.
found a new way to thrive,
Yeah.
going back to his core, which is music. Good, good, good.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Renee, thank you so much for sharing yourself with us today. And I look forward to watching you on LinkedIn and seeing more about what you're creating. It's been great.
Well, keep on sharing your good work too, Doug. You've been doing it
Thanks.
for years and it really makes a difference.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode. If you feel that you learned something valuable today, something that you can use that will make your stories stick, stories that make you and your business memorable, marketable, and monetizable, there are 3 things I'd like you to do. First, click on the follow or subscribe button and leave a review wherever you listen. And second, share this podcast with your friends and coworkers, your email list, and on social media. And third, connect with me on LinkedIn. And when you're ready to get serious about taking your stories to the next level, or if you have an important speech, presentation, or TED Talk coming up, or if you want some guidance on how to make the transition to becoming a professional speaker, let's schedule your free 30-minute coaching session where we can get to know each other and see if we're a good fit. And as always, I'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Let me know that you're out there listening and learning. You can send an email with your questions, comments, and suggestions to Deborah@DougStevenson.com. That's Deborah, Deborah, @DougStevenson.com. Hey, thanks for listening. Until the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.